Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Jan Fran Has Issues, a fortnightly podcast where I, Jan Fran, try and make sense of a senseless world in order to build a better one. I know it's lofty. It's lofty, but we're giving it a shot. This is an episode with Psychologist Basmah Kahil. And before I get into it, I just want to give you a quick note on why I chose Basmah specifically. So I wanted this episode to be about the way in which we process this live stream genocide and the fact that the world has turned away from it. And this was something that Basmah had spoken about publicly before. But not only that, she's a young woman. She lives and works in Western Sydney, and she is of Arab descent. She's of Syrian descent. Now that was important because initially I wanted this episode to focus on the way in which Arabs in the diaspora process this time, right? Because as you can imagine, that's a very specific experience. Obviously one close to my heart for those of you who don't know, my heritage is Lebanese. So I wanted to focus specifically on Arabs, but then I put a call out on my social media saying, hey, I'm going to chat to a psychologist for my podcast. Does anyone have any questions? And when I tell you I was inundated by questions, I mean, there's definitely hundreds. I'm sure that there are questions that I have not even seen. And so I apologize if you sent me questions and they didn't even make it to me. But the point is that made me realize that this was so much broader than Arabs in the diaspora. Everyone was experiencing some form of psychological distress, emotional distress, physical distress about watching the horrors unfolding in Gaza and being able to do nothing about it. And so this episode became much broader. I tried to ask as many questions as I could. Again, I tried to group them up into themes because there were so many questions. So hopefully I got a lot of your questions in there, but there were a lot of common themes around parenting in this time, around how to deal with the guilt of turning away, around what to do about family and friends that are silent, and then just generally how to live well when you've lost your faith in humanity, really. So this is the ground that we cover. I hope it is of comfort to you if you're listening. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Basmah Kahil. I guess I'm going to just start by asking you what I think is just the most redundant question to ask in this time. How are you?
Yes. How are we all? I think that's really the question. How are we all? We're just, it's weird. Honestly, I am weird. We are all weird. It's just a very weird time in our life where there's a lot happening. There's life happening. And also parallel to that, the genocide. And it's just been such a difficult, 18 months just trying to navigate it all.
So when you get asked that question, like, do you go into that zone? Because when people ask me, oh, how are you? I'm like, well,
where do you want to?
Well, but then of course I'm like, I'm fine. How are you? And I feel like I've done 1,000 flips in my head to clock it, put it down, say the nice thing, move on.
Exactly. Where it's like, which part do you want to hear? Like, which part, are we talking about? But look, overall, okay-ish, but in saying that, no, the heart's broken. That's just like, no, the heart's broken, and that's where we're at.
I have a thing with a bunch of close friends of mine where we just don't ask each other that question anymore. Instead, we ask, what are you out of 10 today?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like, give me on a scale of 1 to 10. And I think it creates that kind of like, do you guys also say, all right, if it's a 3 or whatever 2, then is that a green light to to inquire further, because a 3 or a 2 out of 10 is not great. No.
If someone says like it usually doesn't go higher than 6, to be completely honest. Sometimes if it hits 7, you're like, wow. What did you do today? I went for a long walk in the sun. Now I'm 7 or whatever. But I found that a much more helpful thing to do than asking how are you?
Because then it just reduces it to like, okay, what do you like,
good or bad?
Yeah, kind of thing. And even like when we talk, Arabic language and stuff, when traditionally we used to ask people like كيف الحال. So hal is your state, right? So then you'll be asking the person, how is your state? And then I think that's very beautiful, because within that there's like a reflection where you just kind of like check in with yourself, like what is my my current state versus like
Yeah.
how are you? Which you could
Yeah.
say good, bad, and you can also, but I think there's a depth to it.
Yeah.
You know, where you just like, what is my
That's
state?
another good thing. I'm just going to ask people now for like,
Yeah.
oh, hey,
Yeah.
how is your state?
How is your state
today? Yeah.
Let me see. Not great.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
great.
not great. Yeah.
But speaking of, so I think one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to talk to you or talk to a psychologist is because I know myself I'm having a lot of trouble processing all of the horror that we're seeing and the
100%.
reverberations that that's having locally.
100%.
But I know that a lot of people that I follow are also in that boat.
Yeah.
Because they reach out. I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands at this point of, you know, messages, DMs, comments about people, you know, really kind of struggling.
100%.
So I guess if we can just set a bit of a scene around trauma.
Yeah.
How what is it? How do you define it? And what is the difference for you between, you know, like direct trauma and or vicarious trauma, for example?
Yeah, beautiful. So I think that's really very, very fair. And we always, you know, there's no handbook of navigating a genocide. So I think for a lot of us, it's for a lot of us, it's very new. It's very different. It's very loaded. But in terms of trauma, so there's obviously different definitions for it. But usually my go-to is that it's a psychological wound or a wound of the psyche, and it usually comes about when either we witness or we experience an event or many events as well that is so overwhelming to our sense of safety and security, where we feel like extremely hopeless and we feel like we have no control. And it's just very, very difficult to process and make sense of what's unfolding in front of us. And as a result of that inability to process, we develop that very strong psychological wound. Because usually what happens in life, whether we go through, just as we travel and we go through different life experiences, our mind will, you know, positive or negative, we take in that experience, we process it, we make meaning of it, and then we neatly pack it away. So it ends up being like in our memory cabinets, right? But usually with trauma, because the event is so overwhelming, our mind doesn't process it. It doesn't have capacity to process because it doesn't even know like how to pack it, kind of thing. So what ends up happening is that it just stays lingering around, which is why we're more likely to be triggered from that particular thing, because it hasn't been, it's more likely to kind of have a very strong emotional valence attached to it, which is probably why as well we don't process it, because when we think about it, or when we go through it, every time we come to think about it, it is so overwhelming where we shut it off, and then there's no space to process that. So like I was saying, it just stays lingering. And like I was saying, many definitions for trauma, but for me that's always my go-to, because I think it connects most to that sense of safety and security, which is so critical when it comes to like trauma.
I mean, obviously, we're not in Gaza at the moment. And
100%.
even talking about trauma, I'm going to be completely honest, with you in this space, in my safe house with my, well family, I find I find it a bit embarrassing, to be honest. How dare I
hear you,
even, bring this up?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's nowhere near the trauma of what
Gazans
are going through at the moment.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's not there, and it doesn't mean that it's not real.
No.
And so I guess what's the difference between seeing an event rather than directly experiencing it? What's the difference in the trauma there?
So the main difference, trauma, interestingly, it doesn't, a few things actually.
Okay.
I think trauma is subjective. So another definition of it is that it is quite subjective. So what might be traumatic to you might not be traumatic to me, but it's because the way that you make sense of things and your life experience, all of that informs how we process things, right?
Right.
So I think, trying to I would say reduce the comparisons. Like everyone's trauma is valid in that sense because it's so unique. But interestingly, our minds can't really tell the difference between what is real and what is just in our head. So I'll give you an example. Like, we're just sitting here hanging out, but like if me and you were to close our eyes and think of something that is so overwhelmingly uncomfortable,
Right.
we're going to start responding as though we are there, right? We're going to start feeling heart palpitations. We're going to start feeling sweaty in the same seating, right? Me and you are sitting here and we both close our eyes and we think of something that is extremely calming, like our safe place, our people, our comforts. Our body will start responding as though we are in that space. So we'll start feeling a bit more calm. Physiologically, it starts to, kind of like go down. So the idea here is that even though you didn't necessarily experience it firsthand, just seeing it, hearing about it and witnessing it, even through a phone, your mind, because that's the main way, our mind can't really differentiate because it goes off perception. So it's going off what it's receiving. And
Right.
what we are receiving are these images and this heartache and the absolute destruction of a people. So purely because of that, we can still develop that vicarious trauma. So it's, even though it's not like firsthand, it's secondary, but it's still very, very real.
Yeah.
And even just usually when we talk about vicarious trauma, like the people that often experience that are those like first responders. They didn't see anything, but they came after. They hear the stories.
Yeah.
The ones on the phones, listening to, counselors, therapists. They're the ones that are more likely to experience.
Sometimes journalists.
Journalists.
Show up
Absolutely.
As well. They have
1,000%.
Yep.
Because even though they didn't experience it firsthand, but just being exposed to those ideas is enough to make you feel traumatized.
This is what I think is really important, because I think like when we think of vicarious trauma, we do think of first responders, and we do think of, maybe like psychologists or people who enter crime scenes, police, journalists.
Yes.
And like, I don't know if maybe people have registered that like you now as an average citizen, as like your normal person next door, are experiencing to some extent, what would have otherwise been reserved for these like really intense professions that would have a scaffolding around them to make sure that you're okay.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, there was, the censorship. There is no censorship now. Like there is, from before, like our access to news, right, was what was on TV and what was presented. And it was always, just people crying or, just very, I'm going to say clean.
Sanitized.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But now, no, it's completely thrown all the rules about, it's, and
not just that, but it's on your phone, and your phone is like, it's, 10 centimeters away from your face.
100%.
And you're watching it in bed with your,
pick up
your
phone,
husband or your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're in your home.
1,000%. Like it's not like your safe place that you can. No, it's like a 24 access point. Before you sleep, when you wake up, and it's really interesting because I think as the genocide, was happening, we did start to develop a connection with the reporters and the journalists on the ground. So then it ends up being like this experience of checking in on them, like making sure, are they still alive? Did anything happen to them? What's the latest? What's the, so it becomes like this kind of, it's like your family. You're just checking in, and you become actually quite concerned, understandably so, because we're humans by the end of it, and there's that.
It's a grief.
Yeah.
Like it's grief. It's like people, I didn't think I was going to make it through this podcast without crying. I figured that it would happen at some point.
It is a grief. It's a massive grief.
Yeah, because especially if you're like, you're following it, and you start knowing the people by name, and as you say, you're kind of like following them.
Yeah.
And then, you hear the news that like they've been killed or whatever, and you're just like, what do I do with that feeling? Like, how do I even process that?
Yes, 1,000%.
So without just losing my shit so early in the pod,
it's a good podcast.
I mean, that's entirely what this pod is about, right? But I kind of, just to stay on the trauma point, just to kind of wrap it up, because I had one more question, which is like, for anybody listening or watching who might think that they have some kind of vicarious trauma, like what are the warning signs that they should look out for? How does it show up in the body, or in the brain or wherever?
So usually with trauma, it's very interesting. Like it is like a usually when we think about trauma, we just think it's like in the head, it's just like a psych kind of thing. But the way that it manifests in the way that our thought processes kind of unfold. It manifests like in our body. Like a lot of the time, people that feel traumatized, like their body is quite tense, no matter what they always find themselves feeling, or catching themselves in tense positions, whether it's a locked jaw or clenched fists or like your shoulders.
Yeah. I remember once being on the bus and I let go of the bus rail and my palms were so blanched because I didn't realize how tightly I was holding on
1,000%
to the bus rail.
Yes, because it's in your, like, they say it's in your body. It's in your body because it sits there. And when those incidents and things are always at the forefront, like your body will naturally start to curl in, right? And we curl in because it's kind of like a brace. It's kind of like a, when we're more relaxed, we're more expanded. But when we start to feel stressed, we constrict and we go in kind of thing. Intrusive thoughts is a massive one. Nightmares, flashbacks, they're also big factors here. If you heart palpitations, that's also there. Even just your outlook on the world, feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, feelings of betrayal, all of those kind of come in as well. And so it kind of like affects us on different faces or different levels. It's not just like I feel sad, but like it's like an actual on so many fronts. But
okay, so I had put a call out on my Instagram really only a few hours ago saying, hey, I'm going to speak to a psychologist in a couple of hours. Like, does anyone have any questions? I cannot count the number of questions that have come in. I think we're like somewhere around like 300 questions. So what I tried to do was like condense a lot of the questions into, common themes. Because we're talking about, trauma and how it shows up in the body. Here's one question from somebody who DM'd me saying, I feel selfish for even asking if the anxiety that now sits permanently on my chest is valid. Is this trauma, and how do we address it and manage it when it comes from watching the trauma of others?
So the question is that anxiety trauma? The thing is, like, I think we have to reshape our relationship a lot of the time with these things. Like, it's actually not normal to be seeing what we're seeing. Like, in terms of human, like evolution wise, like seeing blood, seeing like sharp objects, that actually has a very what's that word, like an internal response that's built in within us, right? So for us to see that much death and destruction before our eyes, of course we are going to be feeling constantly anxious. Of course we are going to be traumatized. Like, and then
it's so normal to feel this way.
Yes, of
it's
course.
So normal to feel this way because it's so not normal what we're seeing.
1,000%. It is, beyond words. Like, it is so abnormal. And even when it comes to, when we think about trauma, right, usually what we come back to, or what we usually think about, is the actual incident, right? So the babies, for example, that we're seeing, or the homes, or the children crying, we think that's what the trauma is. That is traumatic, right? Don't get me wrong. But usually when we look at trauma, what we also need to consider is the build up to that incident or to that event, and as well the aftermath, because both of those parts are equally as important than the actual event itself. Because if there was a build up, that was like really a difficult build up, then
what do you mean by build up?
So I'll use the example of the genocide. If everything was going really great and life was fantastic for everyone, and then this happened, the way that we respond to it is very different to, for example, the Nakba happening, the occupation that's existed, the killing that was already happening before the actual genocide. So all of these things were already existing way before the genocide now. So that's kind of like the build up, right? So there is already a kind
a
of
baseline of anxiety or something.
Yes,
right?
that has not really a baseline of anxiety, but like a baseline of events that add to the picture, that to the picture or to the event that we're seeing. So it's not like just a random thing. No, it's like what we're witnessing now is years upon years of like occupation, years upon years of dehumanization. So it wasn't like a random overnight thing, right? So when we're seeing these images, like all of this stuff that has happened, right, the build up is coming back to the forefront. Right. So then you have the build up, then you have the actual things that the events and the scenes that we are witnessing, and then there's the aftermath. So the aftermath of that, and what we are seeing now, like for example, the aftermath is, for example, the silence, the enabling, the
erasure,
yes, the isolation that everyone's feeling, like when you look up and everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna maintain
the criminalization of certain words, of certain expressions, of certain ways of speaking and engaging.
1,000%. All of that then again influences our response to this event that we are seeing. So it's never just an isolated experience. And even though like our initial thoughts are like, no one likes to see beheaded babies. No one likes to see that, right? But then that's already quite distressing enough as it is. But when we look at those two other parts, it adds to the distress, right? And that's what, when we talk about the normality of it, none of it is normal. The build up, the actual events and the aftermath, none of it is normal.
I see what you're saying, because it's like if there was, I don't know if this is exactly the best example, but but if there was a natural disaster, say, that came out of nowhere, it like really hit hard, and it caused some serious damage, and we were seeing images of dead bodies and horror.
And the response was like coming in, let's help them, let's provide aid, like appropriate aid that matches the level of destruction. Then you'll be like, oh, okay, like it's hard.
Yes.
It's hard.
And it's still trauma, but this is different.
Yes. Now it becomes like a different kind of, it hits much more deeper than, it's not as like, firstly, it's not as easy to move past it because it's so deeply rooted in terms of like, and that's kind of where like what we're seeing now, it brings up a lot of that moral injury that we sometimes talk about, where what we are seeing goes so against our own values and our own ethics and our own code of conduct internally that we've lost trust on so many fronts with so many people, and we feel so betrayed. So it's a lot more loaded than just seeing those images and feeling anxious about it, because of what we're seeing.
One of the things that's come through with the folks that have sent in questions is the balance. Right. So one of the questions that was sent in, I think this is a really good question, is how do we process the images and the videos that we see when we have to go about our daily business like it's never happened and no one else appears to care or notice? It feels like I'm living two parallel lives sometimes. So that's something I can relate to. How do we balance that? Because I think a lot of us at this point are balancing that. To turn away is not an option. We'll talk about that. So if you've decided, right, this is something we're balancing, how do you do it?
I love that word. How do you balance?
How do you
work-life genocide? What is that?
The work genocide balance. It's hard. It's a tough one.
What I find really, really interesting in that question is the second part. So I think it was like when no one else seems to care.
How do we go about our daily business like it's never happened and no one else
like
seems
it's
to care
never
or
happened
notice?
and no one seems to care. See those two parts? That's why it's so hard to like, obviously it's again very, very loaded, and that's not the only thing, but having that in the picture as well, like where it's not like, for example, you're carrying this heaviness and then you go and you talk it out, you debrief a little bit with your colleague, and then you feel that sense of solidarity. It's like, okay, this is a collective and it's a shared experience, and that definitely does lessen the load. That's not what's happening here. It's like you feel so isolated in your grief, you feel so isolated in your experience, in your caring, and then it makes you feel like really weird. So in terms of like this balance, again, I don't even know if I'd use that word, but
what word would you use?
I don't even know.
There's no words. When you say there's no words, there's no words.
Like actually, what would you say? Like, what are we trying to do here? Like, that's for me, when it comes to these questions, like, what are we actually trying to do here? Are we trying to like live our life as normal as possible in abnormal circumstances?
How do we exist in this world being as true to ourselves as we can?
Yeah. Okay, very, very fair. So in what we would do in that sense is that we would,
while no one else
while no
no
one
one else
else,
notices, is
yes,
you know, yeah.
yes. So I think the idea here is that we have to accept that a lot of people will not. A lot of people don't care, and a lot of people not. And I'm not saying that they're bad. Some people, like, you know, bad in the sense that they don't care. Like, for a lot of people, they just feel so hopeless and helpless, where they're like, I just don't even want to think about it because I don't even know what to do about whatever know what to do. But I think the idea is connect yourself with people that share that pain, because the last thing that you want to do is feel isolated. And I know easier said than done, especially when we live in areas where we feel like our view is like the not popular kind of view. But you know, try your best to, even if it's online, you know, connect yourself to spaces that share the same pain, that offer that solidarity, because again, what we are going through is very much a collective trauma. Right. So it's going to be very hard to try and do this individually. So collective trauma requires collective healing.
So this is an important point for me.
Yeah,
and I think the other thing that has come up with the questions is, how do we deal with the silence and the apathy of our friends? So I'm just going to give you an example of a question. I struggle to deal with the silence from people I used to call friends. This is almost as hard as watching the genocide itself. It's one thing for the world's powerful leaders to enable it, but it's another for your fellow humans, people you've shared so much with, be silent on the issue. How do we feel less alone? And there's another one who asks, you know, one of the biggest challenges has been trying to accept the silence of friends and family I thought were humanitarians. Are these relationships salvageable, or do I let them go because their indifference has broken my heart? And I think, you know, like, that question really hit home for me, because my regular support network, my usual support network, I have friends that I've known for years, if not decades. I can't talk to them about this because they don't get it. Or they don't give a shit. And it's not because they're bad people. They're my friends and I love them and they're great people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they've got their lives going on and they don't really care. Yeah. They think it's terrible, but they just don't really care. And so that support network to me is now sort of lost in a sense. And I guess there's a lot of people that are kind of going through this as well. So if you used to have what you thought was a support network and what you thought was friends, and now you don't, and you're talking about connecting and being closer to community, well, how do you then find that community when the community you knew is gone?
1,000%, yes. And that's another layer of the genocide, is that a lot of what we thought we knew about ourselves, others, and the world has been completely shifted,
upended.
Absolutely. So, and I think that is such a common experience. Like, what we thought we knew about humanity, apparently that's not the case. What we thought we knew about international law, apparently that's not the case. Like, what we thought we knew about our friends, we were like, really? Like, you know, this is such an important thing, and you're just, you know, again, for whatever reason, like, really, like, so it's really thrown so many people off. So again, alongside the scenes and what we are seeing, I think there's been a lot of reshifting for a lot of people, and that's a transition in and of itself. Like, that is such a difficult experience where you thought you had the picture, and now all of a sudden, like you're saying, it's been upended, and now you have pieces, and you're trying to piece the pieces together, trying to find your support people, trying to find the people that connect and understand what you're going through, trying to find the people that care. That's like, don't underestimate how difficult that process is and what that does to your own psyche as well. So yes, I do understand it is really difficult for a lot of people, but, you know, just trying, like, for example, attending protests, or attending groups that where they're coming together for collective action, you know, or even online, like following pages that express solidarity, so you don't feel so isolated in your experience. Of course, nothing beats that good old face-to-face human connection, and that is so important. But if we can start anywhere, just try to find a place, like, be it online, if that's, you know, the capacity that we have. There was also something else that you mentioned in there.
Are these friendships salvageable?
Yes, are these friendships salvageable?
I mean, what do you do when you suddenly realize, like, your best mates, actually you can't fully be yourself?
I think
with
use
them?
them.
Do you hang on to them, or are you like, oh well, now we're just like a friendship that does small talk? What's the point of that?
But if that's what it's evolved to, and look, if it comes back to your values, if that is something that you value quite strongly, like you know, the individual's ability / inability to speak against injustice, then that is the call that you will have to make as to how. Like, I wouldn't say cut throat straight away, you know, because like we were saying, that they are probably still good people, but just making these for whatever reason. But, you know, keep them at arm's length. Not, you know, they probably wouldn't be the ones that you'd be having these conversations with. They're probably not the ones that you'd fall back onto, because they couldn't even like speak up against the genocide or even feel that kind of like connectedness to it. So it's kind of like,
or even reach out.
Yeah. Look, it tells you more about them and like, and where they're at. And then so that means
fine,
it's,
yeah.
and it brings up a grief as well. Like it's there's a lot, you know what I mean? It brings up a grief and you're like, oh, well, okay, so what do I do with this? You know,
you're grieving the loss of people that you thought you knew, or you
Yes.
thought that they were your friends, in a way that you're probably discovering that they're
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
yeah.
And, you know, so just trying to, like, you make that judgment. It could be a lack of, you know, it could be misinformation. They could just need more. I mean, it's everything's out there, you know, and it's not really our job necessarily to educate people, because everything is so clear cut and it's all there.
Like I'm not coming with a PowerPoint presentation. I don't have the
yes.
I don't have the bandwidth, and I don't have the will to want to do that. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to happen.
I know. And I would also say in spaces like this, or in times like this, really come to know your own values, because I think that there is nothing as strong as you knowing more about yourself. And understanding your own set of values, so you don't compromise them, and so you can just exist and live your life with that integrity. Like, we cannot control everyone. We cannot be, you know, we can't enter everyone's life and fix those wires or whatever, zap of the empathy where now it starts, or whatever. We can't do that. So we have to kind of focus on our circle of control, what it is that I can control, what is within my hands, what is within my capacity. And a part of that is knowing yourself. A part of that is you maintaining, even though if the whole entire world is not saying anything, but if you feel like by you speaking out is in line with your values and you can go to sleep at night, okay, then that's it. Like, that is it. And it's a long road.
It's a long road.
And I think we have to remind ourselves it is a very long road. So don't get caught up by that extra. Honor that, right? Honor the friendships that have been now like disrupted. That's okay. That's understandable, and give space to grieve. But at the same time, keep moving forward. Like, don't get so caught up in those losses, because it is much, much bigger than that.
Yeah. Okay. Honor that. Feel that.
Yeah.
Let that feeling come.
1,000%.
Let that feeling go. But just be clear about your North Star, which is what you value.
Yes. Yep. Which is
okay.
justice.
And that's what's going. Yep. Justice. And that's what's going to drive you to community. Is the others following that North Star as well. You'll meet there.
Exactly. And there are so many people. There are so many people. And like I really feel like the biggest example here is just like, if it really wasn't that important, it wouldn't have gained that much traction on social media. So there are so many people that actually care. Yeah. You know, unfortunately, it's not within your circle, or, you know, but don't let that deter you from the bigger picture. Yeah. This is only one part, you know, of what's happening.
The other big thing that kind of comes up for people is certain feelings. Yeah. And the ones that I hear the most about are feelings of guilt. Guilt is a really big one. Guilt for turning away, guilt for having a good time, guilt for not thinking about it, guilt for being born into this life, all forms of guilt. Yeah. And then there's helplessness. I can't do anything about it. I feel so helpless. And then of course there's just like an infinite level of sadness. Yes. So I'm just going to go through those feelings, like particularly with the guilt. Like how do you cope with the guilt, wherever it might come from?
Yeah, fair. So with guilt, it's actually a very interesting. So it's actually like a higher order emotion. Like, it's different to happiness and sadness, because it's really connected to social connection. Like, guilt is kind of within us because it helps drive our behavior. And we all know people that don't have guilt, how they just like anything. They just exist in their life.
Right. Okay.
Right. So guilt.
So actually, it's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
You know,
1,000%. So guilt.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So guilt, it either tells us that we've done something that we shouldn't have done, or we didn't do something that we were meant to do.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So either we did something and I actually shouldn't have done that, or I was meant to do something but I didn't do it.
Right. So I can see where the guilt might come from. Like, I've done something that I shouldn't have done. I've had fun and I shouldn't have had fun. Or I haven't done something that I was meant to do, which is I haven't looked today.
Yes.
I haven't done that thing that I was meant to do, and that's where I feel guilty.
Exactly.
Okay.
And both of those drive that behavior again, because if we didn't reflect and if we didn't have that remorse, then we wouldn't come back and adjust our behavior, amend our behavior in order to maintain that community, or in order to maintain that belonging and that connection, right? So as ugly as it feels, right? I think we do have to redefine or readjust our relationship with guilt, because it's not entirely a bad thing.
Honor it. I like that word that you used before. Honor it. Honor
absolutely.
that feeling.
Give it space. Like, it's there for a reason. Because in times where, like, you know, again with the genocide, where it is bigger than us, we will always feel like that we are not doing things that we are meant to be doing, right? Because but it's actually bigger than us in that sense. That doesn't mean that we don't do things, right?
Yeah.
So, but we still do. But always keeping in the back of our mind that it is much, much bigger than one individual human being, and life still has to exist, right? So it's not that we can just like we still have family, we still have work, we still have homes. Like, all of this happens, and it needs to happen, because that's the nature of life. But it doesn't mean like we need to completely switch off that part. But I think that's where I find a lot of us struggle, again, maybe with that balance, or maybe with that, with the mixture, because they're so, like, they're such contrasting experiences. Like, when a baby doesn't have formula, or when children are crying because they don't have, and then my kids here, and like, they're, you know, food's on the table and it's in abundance and stuff. Like, that's so, you know, it's very hard to
reconcile those two.
To reconcile. Absolutely.
So how do you do it? Because you have to get through those moments, right?
Yeah,
like
1,000%.
And I'm like, this pops up in the minutia of everyday life.
Yeah.
You're feeding your kid. I'm thinking about all the kids that don't have food.
Yes.
You're walking your kid up to, you know, daycare. I'm thinking about all of the people that have had to walk,
1,000%.
you know, however many kilometers with all of their things and all of their children.
Yes.
You know, you're like driving in the car and filling up petrol, and I'm thinking about all of the people
that don't have that.
That don't have that, and they can't get around. I'm putting on the light. And I'm thinking of all the people who have to live by candle. Like, it is every single day. It is constant.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, like, what is the remedy for that?
I think, look, in times like that, it's really important to understand that you have, like, you didn't choose, right? Like, I'm gonna be so real. Like, you didn't choose to have all of this. This was what you've been given, right? Okay, because you didn't choose, right? You didn't choose to have it. Just practice that gratitude, acknowledge that, you know, I have this and I am so grateful for it, right? And because I have it and my baseline is so full and I am so, like, it's met and I don't have to worry about these things, now I can, from the leftover or from whatever I have, I need to give, or I need to do with it. So for example, like, you have your family and you're so grateful for that, and you have, like, you know, those little interactions, then set time aside to do more in the other space. So in the space of advocacy, or more in the space of, like, talking about it, or just, like, doing whatever things that you can do. But I find sometimes we bring in that comparison point and we judge ourselves so harshly for these things, right? But it is bigger and beyond us. So we just have to, like, sometimes switch that little voice where it's like, oh my God, like, where it's kind of like looking at you and it's like, oh my God, look at what you have, and they don't have that,
right?
Like, you know, so slowing it down a little bit, toning it down. It's like, okay, yes, I am so grateful that I have all of this stuff, and at the same time I'm going to do more, and I'm going to keep again, whatever capacity that looks like. But I think when we're trying to constantly compare, it's a massive injustice for us, because it just keeps us stuck in this loop of feeling crap and feeling bad about ourselves. And then we just go more and more deeper into that feeling of helplessness, where it's like, okay, well, I can't really, but we can do so much.
It's gratitude.
Yes.
an action.
Yes, 1,000%. There needs to be that gratitude because you didn't choose, like, you didn't ask your parents to be born in this country. Right? I didn't ask my parents to be born in this country. This is what we were given, so we work with what we have, what we've been given. But again, a lot of the time we go back and we compare, but the comparison, as genuine, I think, as it is, and as well intended, you know, like I know when we always, you know, with our kids and when they don't want to finish their food, we're like, just, you know, but in saying that, it does more harm than good if we don't cap it. You know what I mean? Like if we don't cap it and say, all right, you know, let's just focus on what I can do, then it just keeps us stuck in that cycle of shame and guilt and helplessness, which is not where we want to be now.
I feel like the capping of something or the setting boundaries around something is really, really important in this discussion.
So important. It is so important.
Yeah.
Because
one of the questions, sorry, I just wanted to ask you,
of
because one of the questions that came up was, again, this one made a lot of sense to me. I struggle to go from reading about the events in Gaza and the very next second a reel trying to sell me something. It's making me judge other people who are sharing stories about genocide and the very next minute sharing stories about sipping drinks from a pool in Bali or somewhere. So like this idea of like this constant sort of overload of just everything. Good, bad, fun, sad, big, small, all of it.
That's right. I think, again, in times like this, our capacity is already quite, like, we're quite limited in capacity in terms of like mental capacity. Our brain, like the contents of it is just so full of stuff, which is why we really need to be a lot more intentional in where we place our focus, our time, our energy, our concentration. Like, where are we placing these limited resources? And are we just giving them out to every single, you know, app or every single, you know, page or story or whatever? Or are we being a bit more conscious in that giving, where we are placing it in more fruitful places? If that makes sense.
It does. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a perfect sort of summation, is that your energy and your brain space and your time is finite. Absolutely. It's a finite resource. So think deliberately and intentionally about where you want to put that resource.
You can't, it's too precious to just be giving it out. To anyone. Like, it's too precious because, again, there is a lot more that there's a lot that we can be doing, and wasting it. Look, don't get me wrong. It's very uncomfortable and it's very annoying, you know, when you're just scrolling through, you see these images and then you just see someone like living their life. But again, coming back to living their life, like as in, which is fine.
Yeah, just they're living their life. They have to live their life. Yeah.
I know, right? Like, but again, in saying that, you just have to, again, come back to yourself. A lot of it is coming back and saying, okay, what is within my control? I can't control this person from sipping their drink in Bali or whatever. It is, again, honor whatever's coming up. It's annoying. It's uncomfortable. It makes me think, like, am I really just, does the world not care? Those are all really valid, you know, thought processes and experiences. But then come back to yourself. You know, what can I do? What is within my control? You know, that doesn't mean like you can't go to Bali, by the way. And you know,
I mean, life does have, we have lives to live. We have jobs to go to. We have family. So actually, this is on that point. There was another question. Let me just find it, which is about like parenting. Parenting and family in this time. So thank you to whoever sent this question in. I'm not going to name their names. I'm really struggling with putting myself first for my family, as my partner puts it, and feeling like a piece of shit. That I have the privilege of being able to do that, when the only difference between myself and the beautiful Palestinian people is my luck of where I was born. I also want to help so bad, but not sure how, while trying to keep my mental health okay for my work and for my 3-year-old daughter. Like, how do you even parent in this time? I used to not be able to like look at my son without seeing him with a bullet lodged in the back of his head with limbs missing.
can I just point out that that's probably a sign of vicarious trauma. And I would honestly, like, I would really, really encourage anyone that does have that, where the thoughts are quite intrusive, to seek professional support. And to not, okay, we talk about the things being normal. Yes, it is normal, but having to kind of like figure that stuff out on your own it's not fun. It's very scary. So definitely, if you feel like that, you know, there's something there, go and seek professional support.
A lot of people were reaching out with intrusive thoughts.
Yes.
Saying how do I manage the intrusive thoughts? How do I stop them from happening?
Yeah, and the intrusive thoughts are going to be very particular to your own, like, what you have. So for example, with you and your son, like that's where the intrusive thoughts came through, right? So it's really good to get a more tailored kind of like treatment plan, not treatment plan, but like a more tailored approach in terms of like reducing those intrusive thoughts. But how do we parent in this day and age with everything that's happening?
Yeah. How do we be present for our kids? Like, I've had to put pretty stringent social media blockers on.
Yes.
I have an app that blocks my access to
Yeah.
all of my social media apps, all of my news websites. I can only get in for an hour a day.
Yeah.
Or 2 hours, one in the morning, one in the evening.
Yeah.
And if I miss that window, and I can't uninstall the app. It's like heavy duty.
Oh wow!
You know what I mean?
Send it to me, honey.
Yeah, but I've had to do that.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I just was not, especially like present with my son.
Yeah,
Like my
yes.
partner would say to me, I can hear him asking you a question, and he's asked it to you.
Yeah.
You know, once, twice, 3 times, and you haven't responded. Like you're not hearing him.
Yes.
And I think like from that moment, that was really like that hit me pretty hard.
Yeah.
And
you're probably in.
I was just.
in.
Yeah.
I
was just in.
I think when you have dependents, it's very, very different. Like if you're on your own. So, you know, as parents, as much as we talk about like, you know, wanting to, I guess, to bear witness, because that's so, so important in this. But I think also there needs to be a level of self-preservation. But I say this in the sense that to preserve your own sanity, not to escape the reality, but rather to keep yourself at a baseline where you're able to be most efficient. You know, so it could be like, you know, as parents, having these conversations with our children, taking them out to protests, instilling these, you know, values of justice, for example, within them. So it's not done, you know, so we're not just like trying to like disconnect and separate those parts, you know, the parenting part versus like the activists within us, for example, because this, again, what we're seeing, it's so holistic in the sense that it covers so many aspects of our living.
All encompassing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, all encompassing. So it's very hard to, like, I wouldn't encourage people to try and separate the two, like try to be a parent versus try to like be someone who is watching what's happening and wants to do something about it. We can definitely integrate it, but a part of that is that self-preservation where you do have to actually look after yourself as well. Because if you don't look after yourself, then the little ones around us will also struggle. You know, so it's kind of like, again, an intentional disconnect and an intentional separation. You know, but not with the intention to pretend like nothing's happening and everything's all great, but rather to maintain our energy, maintain our limited resources in order to place it in the spaces that actually matter.
Yeah. I had a friend text in who was saying, is compartmentalization denial. Because what she does is she sets time aside to engage. And then when that time is done, then she just puts that compartment away. And I think she was feeling like, am I burying my head in the sand when I do that? But I actually think that that's a healthy
1000%.
way to manage. I don't
agree.
think you're burying your head in the sand at all. I think you're being deliberate and putting those
1000%.
boundaries around that we've talked about.
And I think, like, ask yourself these questions. And I think the people that care the most are the ones that are hypercritical about their practices, you know, because they want to care, right? The fact that she's like, you know, reflecting on these kind of questions, she very clearly wants to care about the cause. So I think think like always ask yourself why am I doing it? Am I doing it to pretend like that nothing happened? Or am I doing it because I need to preserve again my
energy
mental
and sanity,
exactly, in order
energy,
to give whatever is around me its rights or whatever, and then to keep kind of moving. So no, I wouldn't say it's denial at all. And compartmentalization is actually a really good strategy. It's also a really difficult one. Like if you can get a grasp of it, it's fantastic, and I really, really encourage people to kind of like to separate, again, like not separating to disconnect or like to be in that denial, but like giving yourself some time to see whatever's on the news or whatever, keep up to date, pack it away, then keep moving. So the idea in all of this is we want to just in the back of our mind try to keep moving with in the sense of keeping moving forward in order until we dismantle everything, until there is no more genocide. And even if there is no more genocide, but like even beyond that, because even the end of the genocide is not the end of what is actually happening. So keeping that in the back of our mind, because we don't want it to just be how do I explain it? Like we don't want it to only be a call to the end of the genocide. Like we want it to be like a call to the end of the occupation, because all of that is attached to it as well. But yeah, I don't know.
God.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I threw you off.
Well, it does feel huge, and it does feel overwhelming.
It does.
And like I do have to come back to that question of like what is in my control. What are the kind of like parameters that I'm going to set with when and how I engage. And then like self-preservation, because like as you paint that picture, it's a long road.
Yes,
that's a long big picture that you've painted, and you know you need that rest time and that downtime.
Yeah, you do.
If that's the road that you're going to go down, you know.
And like just asking ourselves as well, like what is it that we're, you know, are we just, and I say this to be so real with everyone in the sense that like, do we just want the genocide to end because it's really, really uncomfortable for ourselves? You know, and it's uncomfortable to see all of this, and we just wish it didn't happen so we don't have to be exposed to this stuff, and then we can just like go back to normal. Like, is that what we're after? Because
you know what, if I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like a year and a half ago I might have said like maybe we just want this horror to end, you know, like
uncomfortable,
right? Because I can't bear with it. I can't deal with
it.
And let's just go back to the status quo. Like the status quo was not great, but it's better than this, and let's just do that, you know. And I think that what has like really weighed on me as with each day that passes is like, I don't think we can go back to the status quo. The status quo has been shown to be a mirage in a lot of ways. And so it's now you're like, okay, well, if you can't go back to the status quo, and we're here, like and that's when it just becomes like, oh shit, that's that feeling of like, oh, I can't quite grasp exactly what it is that I'm dealing with. You know, which is this kind of cataclysmic shift in everything that I've thought about the world.
1,000%.
It was wrong.
Yes. Which is why we just, again, being a bit kind to ourselves, because we have so many questions, but not enough answers, I think, in that sense. Because what do we actually, that's what I was saying earlier, that like it's actually thrown so many people off, where they're like, what do I do with all of this stuff now? Like what I thought I knew is not the case. So what am I fighting, like not fighting for in that sense, but like what am I going towards? What's the end goal here? What's like, what is it, you know? And again, too many questions, not enough clear, not accessible, but like clear answers that are easily achievable within an overnight thing. And again, it's not going to happen overnight, and just always reminding ourselves that this is really what we are witnessing. Again, the build-up is the years upon years of systematic oppression and colonization. It's not going to get dismantled overnight. You know, I don't know, but it's really, really not. So, okay, say we want it to, you know, we want the bombing to end, but that's not, it's, you know, it's not going to end there, you know, and that's, I think, if I say this so respectfully to everyone, and I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but if we are real about upholding justice, and if we are real about, you know, wanting to live in line with our own values, like these, I'm not saying have the answers, but these are questions that we need to like ask ourselves, and they are uncomfortable questions.
So uncomfortable.
They're so uncomfortable. But again, if I'm being so real, like for some people where they've found, you know, answers like that and they've acted on those answers, they've also gotten a lot of repercussions when they've called out things for what they are. So there's that fear as well where people are just like, I don't want to think about that because I wouldn't even know how to deal. You know, so it's understandable, but at the same time, I wouldn't completely try to shove that part under the carpet, especially when we're talking about our mental health, like, because we don't want to only center our own experiences. Like centering our experiences is really important. Like we need to do that at times, but at the same time, we live collectively. So my experience is heavily shaped by the other's experience as well. So we can't completely separate it. So like what they're going through is influences what I'm going through, and then you can't entirely separate it.
I keep like the thing that I keep coming back to that is like was clear from, you know, all of the conversations that I've had with a bunch of people, and now clear from this conversation is like the role of community here is so important.
Yes.
Finding your community. Maybe some people will have to build a new community. That's hard because they feel like really isolated from their friends and family. But the building of a community, the finding of a community,
so
and
important.
the being in a community
is
going to be really important.
It is one of the most important. Again, like we were saying earlier, it's collective trauma. It really needs collective healing. You need to be in community now. It's not an isolated... Because it's not I'm going through that, but so is that person and that person and that person and that person. So coming together and you know, sharing those experiences, knowing that you're not alone, it does a lot. It does a lot. It gives you that strength. It doesn't make you feel so hopeless. You know, you're like, all right, at least if we go down, we're going to go down together, kind of thing.
It's grounding as well, because you can look at someone across the room and they're like, you're not crazy. And you're like, okay, great. I feel, because I was feeling it for a while, but now I'm like, I see you and I'm like, cool, I feel I feel good again.
And even just talking it out, like talking out whatever you're going through and relative to what's happening. Does so much, and just it does a lot. So do not underestimate the power of community.
Community. And then also the other thing that I got from this conversation is like your values, and being true to your values, and being true to your core, and asking yourself, actually sitting down with yourself and saying, what do I value? Where do my values sit? And invariably trying to find the people that you have that a common value with.
1,000%.
And also boundaries. Boundaries is the other thing that I got from. I'm trying to like sum up of all the ways that we can kind of cope with this. Put the parameters and be deliberate.
Yes, be intentional. In what you do, in your action, in those finite resources. 1,000%. Intentionality is massive. Knowing your values. Again, I love how you said the Northern Star. Keep that in your vision, and just keep moving towards that, because again, with what we are seeing, it is actually, you know, the people in Palestine, they are going through a very physical war, right? It's absolutely physical. What we are going through here on the other side, living in our own homes, it's very much a psychological war. So even though, you know, we have it's really interesting, but a lot of the things that we are seeing and that we're going through, it's actually a tactic. Like, it's a psychological warfare tactic that is used to make us feel helpless, to make us feel like, you know, what you're doing is never going to be enough. You want to go to those protests, that's really, really cute, but look what it did for you. It actually didn't do anything for you, so what are you going to do now? So it's kind of like looking at it from a systems kind of perspective, is that we don't want to give into that psychological warfare at all, right? When Dr. Gabor came to visit, when he came to visit Sydney, I was very fortunate to sit with him alongside other mental health professionals. And then one of the questions that was asked to him is that... This
is Gabor Mate.
Yeah, Gabor Mate. Sorry.
Mental health practitioner. I think he's Canadian.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yes, Dr. Gabor Mate. Yeah. I just thought everyone knows Gabor
Mate. Yeah, I think most people watching this will probably know Gabor Mate. Yeah.
So one of the questions that was asked to him was, what can we be doing? Like, what more can we be doing? What is it that we are meant to be doing? And he's like, just don't stop. Just keep doing. Keep talking. Don't ever think that what you were doing is not in vain. It is crumbling. The system is not going to last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Just keep moving forward and just keep doing. It's like, don't ever think that like what you're doing is not going to change the things. So believing in ourselves. And we might not being attached. He also, don't be attached to the outcome. He's like, you just do your part and keep doing that well, and then it will eventually unfold in the way that we hopefully would like it to. Like, say none of it works and we all die, as an example, but at least you did something. Like, at least you can die happy, like saying, all right, I don't know, I really don't know if it did or didn't, but at least I lived with integrity and I lived in a way that was in line with my values. Versus not.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I'd rather the former, to be honest. Yeah,
me too.
Yeah,
and then I can.
But it's fucking hard.
I know.
I wish I didn't care. I'm embarrassed saying that. I'm embarrassed saying it. But part of me just like, I look at all these people and they're just having a normal time. I'm like, why can't I do that?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Again, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts.
maybe for episode 2. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time to talk to me.
Thank you
today,
for having me.
I hope that it's certainly been very helpful for me.
No
I hope it's been
worries
helpful for those listening and watching as well.
I hope so
cathartic
too.
in some way for you. You're probably just drained.
Have my tea, which
I
want to sip it. But no, thank you for having me, and I hope it made sense, and I hope it was there would be some takeaways in terms of like just moving forward from this and not getting so pulled down by everything. It's not easy, and I think acknowledging again, it's not easy, but we have to keep moving.
That concludes my chat with psychologist Basmah Kahil. I'm not going to say that I hope you enjoyed that chat, but I hope that you got something out of it, because it took me a long time to decide to do it. I had a lot of shame about even remotely feeling traumatized, and I'm glad that I did do it in the end, because I found it helpful, and hopefully you did too. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.